Hello, Kevin.
Hey Joe, how you doing today?
Great.
Good. We'll start with introductions. We kind of have an outline of what we want to talk about, but let's go ahead and do introductions. I'm a private pilot, remote pilot, and LSRM. Have the current four categories on the maintenance side. And Joe, go ahead and give your qualifications.
I'm a private pilot and I'm also instrument rated. I have my remote pilot also. Um, I got my private pilot certificate a month after 9/11. I actually had my check ride with Velta Ben scheduled on 9/11, so it got canceled for a month.
I can
Um,
I can imagine.
and I think by that time you had already left the U.S. House. That's where we met back in the day. It was just me, I think. Well, no, you were barely coming back. No, I think you were barely coming into the house, weren't you? When we 9/11, were you coming
So,
in or going out?
so 9/11, I remember that morning I was doing my internet service, and I had to get into the office that day. So I was doing my ISP at the time.
Oh, okay. So you were barely headed my way in
Yep,
9/11.
yep.
And then that the US House did a lot of we had a little growth in our team, and then you came on, and we still had some contractors and some other people, and then we both left the house. I went to the government printing office, and from there I went to the FBI and finished out 29 years in federal government. So I'm uh I'm a swamp thing.
It's okay. Yeah, yeah. After I left the house, I ended up doing contracting with DoD and NSA and a bunch of other um, government agencies, and then I went back and I worked at Optum, which was United Health Group, for several years. Then I started my company and left United Health Group, and now I'm back at United Health Group again. So it's been we've known each other for a long time, and I like our discussions because it makes me think. So that's why we're here today. I thought it'd be a good idea because we started talking about Mosaic and all the different key points of that and how we see these changes. And it is very, very interesting how the government is kind of outsourcing the creation of regulation and lawmaking and things like that by putting it out to committees, especially like ASTM and NFPA and these outside bodies that have created guidance for industry for many many years. It's I find it interesting that the government trusts those organizations enough, um, that now we see with aviation, we're starting to see us not only follow other countries, but have outside influence from consensus standards groups. And so we're in this Mosaic thing, and I'll read through some of the key points of Mosaic, and then we can get into talking about that. There's really I would I would say on the standard aircraft side, like we refer to that as Part 23. There's very few aircraft actually being manufactured annually. I think the number is around 3,000 a year, and that covers the single pistons, turbines, and some of the other designs that are piston powered. So that's a small number of aircraft when you think about it. So the FAA realizes like, hey, they got to do something to kind of jumpstart the creation of not only pilots because we had a slight decline in pilots, but also aircraft. We've had a decline in the manufacturing, um, and
Okay.
I think a lot of that is to many different reasons: economy, um, pilot age. There's many different things that affect that, but we really have three different things that we'll probably end up talking about, which is Part 23 standard aircraft, the new Mosaic definition of a light sport. It's not really light sport. They're throwing the term out, but Part 22 aircraft, which is new under Mosaic, That's the ASTM based standards. And then we we have the experimental amateur built aircraft, which is growing by leaps and bounds. And we've got some different opinions on some of those, and it's good to talk about that. So that's why we're here. So part 23, let's talk about part 23 a minute.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that the industry needs to settle is that Mosaic isn't going to replace Part 22, or I'm sorry, Part 22 isn't going to replace Part 23. So Mosaic is not going to replace uh, commercial aircraft certification type stuff. Or at least that's not my understanding. So, and once you wrap your head around that, then you're going to have aircraft that are designed for a specific mission set. And there's always that creep factor where, you, you, you make an investment into an asset and then you want to use that asset for something else. So, and I don't think the regulatory structure really lets that happen. And I don't know that you want it to happen. So that's I think one of the problems in um, not making it clear that you're going to put a you're going to certify aircraft out there for personal use. At some point, these people that are using personal use are going to want to use it for something else, and that's where I think we're gonna start seeing a lot of chaos or a lot of different opinions really clash.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that's why we had if you look at the ASTM standards, some commercial operations were discussed with the FAA and the stakeholders. But the one that they're never going to approve, from our understanding, is uh, carriage of passengers. Like that is the one that they've really said that it's not designed for that. It's designed for recreation and personal use. And that's where the split. So I agree. You're right. There's always going to be a need for Part 23. I think the problem that, as I see Part 23, the problem is a lot of the parts are coming from overseas. Even with certified engines and on the maintenance side, since I deal with some of that, just the lead time to get an engine, a Lycoming or Continental rebuilt, can be 8, 12, sometimes 18 months. And it's not necessarily that we're not able to get those parts in the US or make those parts in the US. It's that it is cheaper, more economical to make them elsewhere and ship them here, which is a completely separate issue. We Part 23 is interesting because we have the airworthiness directives that come out that dictate when a problem is found, how those issues need to be resolved. And when we think about these certified aircraft, they're 70, 80, 90 years old. And I don't think anyone thought that these planes would still be flying this many years
Yeah,
later.
I agree. The supply chain for parts, though, um, I know in some of the research that I've done is that there's a lot of uh, GA corporate type jet companies that have nearshored a lot of the parts to Mexico and Canada. So maybe the piston uh, crowd needs to take a look uh, at those two nearshoring possibilities to increase the number of those consumable parts that all these piston aircrafts need. Like I'm sure vacuum pumps is there's a the vacuum pump's going to die in X number of hours. So you know that that's got to be replaced. So rather than um, letting your primary source be halfway around the world, maybe you move that to Canada or Mexico, because they already got the engineering to do that in cities like Monterrey. I think Monterrey, Mexico, has some of the Falcon Jet wiring harnesses, a lot of pieces that go into finishing the aircraft. Um, so if if we could if the Pipers and the Beechcrafts and the like don't figure out the supply chain, I agree with you. I'm not going to have as we affectionately call a spam can to fly in. You know, the 172s aren't going to have the parts they need, or the Piper Arrows or the Piper Cherokees. So, and there are more Pipers being built, and there are more Cessnas being built, but not in the volume to keep the cost to where, it would be under 400,000 for a brand new airplane. And that's usually a, a barrier to entry that you're not going to get more. You're going to get more pilots, but not necessarily more aircraft for pilots to fly. So supply demand, somebody's making money. It ain't the pilot, that's for sure.
Yeah, if you look back 20 years, when the SLSA, the sport pilot program was launched, their big thing and the big talk at the time was we're going to have sub 200,000 K, 200K aircraft available to purchase. Well, that happened initially, and then and when the volume wasn't there, it got more expensive, and the aircraft nowadays are 300, 400, 500,000 a piece. So I think that's a common thought. We've seen this before. We've been here 20 years ago with the original sport pilot program when they thought we were going to get inexpensive aircraft. That was the purpose. That's why they created it, but that's not what panned out at the end of the day. We
Yeah.
ended up with the cost of those aircraft. To be honest, we ended up with a lot of manufacturers that jumped on board, and there's a lot of orphaned aircraft in the SLSA category today that are becoming increasingly more and more difficult to maintain. One of the planes that I own, which is a Skyboy, those parts, the only option you have is to move to the experimental category and to manufacture the parts yourself. You can't buy them. There's no manufacturer anymore. Um, and you can't even find salvage parts for those aircraft. And that's the fear that we have with all aircraft designs. When the manufacturer goes away, or a new manufacturer or someone purchases a manufacturer and they want to concentrate on specific things, these older legacy designs become more increasingly expensive to repair and to maintain. So I hope these manufacturers do figure it out. I know if the aircraft is Part 23 and it's not being used for commercial purposes, there are pathways to basically have user generated parts. That's something that's kind of interesting in that if it's not being used commercially, there are ways for the owner or operator is what the wording says, to manufacture their own replacement parts, but that's very limited. Um,
See, and in that, if as a pilot that rents aircraft, I would I would be inclined to say, hey, it's your airplane. You do whatever you want. You want to take it from Part 23 and make it experimental because you're having a hard time putting parts and stuff. More power to you, but don't lease it back to the schools or back to anybody that's going to rent me that plane, because I don't know that. I mean, I trust that I don't want to have to be going to the the person that's renting me the aircraft and then having to look through all the who's owned it, and then, oh, okay, now you got to go get all the logbook, the aircraft logbooks. Oh, they didn't have this particular part, so I built it myself. I mean, that's the due diligence that the pilot's supposed to do, right? Because,
Absolutely.
so is it airworthy? So right now, I take it a little bit for granted that the person that I'm renting the plane from has always kept it at that Part 23, ANP, IA,
Yep.
yada yada yada, that. So if you're gonna start letting planes um, build their own parts or substitute parts that aren't Part 23, they need to be taken off the rolls as and only used for personal use.
Let's
Because
let's talk about that for a second. That's a very good point. And we'll get back to the other discussion you brought up, which is vacuum pumps.
yeah,
A lot of the Cessna 172s and Pipers, they're starting to remove the vacuum system and move to solid state with artificial horizon devices like your Garmin G5s and some of your EPIS systems. Now, the original STC, the type certification for that aircraft specifies that it's got a vacuum pump. But the technology is coming along to the point to where removing the vacuum system is not going to make the aircraft any more dangerous. Um, it's almost like a bell curve that as that vacuum system ages, you're moving towards mean time to failure, which you don't know when that is.
yeah,
Um, with the solid state devices, they're saying, yeah, go ahead and remove that vacuum system, but you need two devices that can give you the same reference data in case one fails. And I've run into this with aircraft to where we it doesn't have a vacuum system, but it has two G5s in there that are coming off of two different power buses in case you have a full power loss. And a lot of the G5s have backup standby battery as well, that if you lose power in the ship, you're still going to have your reference to the ground. Both of my aircraft are configured that way for that reason. Um, but it's one of those things like you're right. Once you start moving away and changing things that the aircraft no longer meets the STC or the type certifications or all the things, the PMA that, for all the parts on it, then you have this situation where the person running that aircraft or flying that aircraft doesn't know if they can trust it or not. And that is a valid concern for sure. Um, we can all point to accidents that have occurred because there's not a lot. Like I know, like uh, there's a podcast where they were discussing unapproved parts and they were searching the database and they only came up with a handful of instances, which is good. Um, but I think that sort of thing may happen more often than we actually catch with statistics. But I definitely agree. Mosaic is interesting because when you talk about the approved parts, like it's a consensus standard. So we have groups of pilots, A&Ps, manufacturers, just the general public that have joined the committee that are concerned about things like noise and pollution. Like all of those people will come together in this consensus model, and we create this standard. And I'm on the committee, but I will say this: I don't know that any committee that's doing something like that is going to figure out 100% of everything right from the start. So the only thing that makes me feel good about where we are with the new consensus standards for the aircraft is that we've got 20 years of the light sport history and statistics that we can look at that are very similar to what we're releasing now. Really, the change now is that you can fly at night and you can fly a 172 now that it meets the light sport definition. You can fly a Piper, PA 28 that meets the definition. So I think we've changed the definition of what a light sport is to. I think the goal is to get more people flying, and I think that's always the goal when we do these things. But I think we certainly probably haven't accounted for 100% of all the things we're going to run into. Um, Even when you mention the commercial operations like pipeline surveys, aerial photography, um, you can even do flight training, all that stuff with these new aircraft. But the one thing is you can't carry passengers for compensation or hire. If you're going to want to do that, it's got to be a Part 23 or a Part 135.
And the other day I sent you the circular for sharing expenses.
Yep,
It's real dicey on creating a common purpose. So if you and I decide to take one of these experimental aircraft, and let's say we were going to uh, Chicago, and sometimes the regulator gets really crazy, and you and I both have to be going to the same conference for it to be called common purpose. You
right.
can't go to one conference and me go just to hang out with my relatives. If the FAA doesn't, figure out the common purpose should be both of us to just want to go to Chicago. What we're
Yeah,
going to Chicago is, beyond the common purpose. And sometimes when you fall off the regulator cliff and getting, you would you create these um, situations where it borders on the gray, is it commercial? Is it not commercial? I think the FAA or maybe Congress needs to specifically define what common purpose is, because I I want to see the mosaic, all those things that you brought up, the the individual knowing the machine they're in, they know the risk, they're okay with it. Let them be the decider on all that that's personal. But if you and I, or if two pilots decide to take one of these experimentals, and one of the pilots happens to be trying to build hours for to become an airline pilot, is you know are you going to get in crossways because you're not using that aircraft for the the purpose, just because you're one of the people in the plane is getting benefit for those 1,500 hours that you need.
yeah,
That is considered commercial use. I mean, I'm like, wait a minute, he's just that makes no sense. But that's, if you look at some of their common purpose, uh the guides on that in that circular, it's pretty darn strict.
yeah,
So
it is.
so even in Part 23 aircraft, you got the same problem. So you've got two strikes now. You got a Mosaic airplane for personal, non-commercial, and then you're trying to build time, people trying to reduce their expenses. All those things need to just be put out in plain English so us pilots don't fall off the cliff.
Oh,
Because
I agree. Definitely
because
agree.
I don't I I wanna make flying cheaper too, but if you don't have more supply, which is more aircraft, you know, uh, more instructors, more mechanics. If you don't have more of those, supply and demand, the less you have, the higher the cost. So all those we need to figure out how Mosaic can help push those things forward, where you get more mechanics, you get more instructors, you get because we're not gonna see a reduction in flying unless there's more people doing it. And then
No,
you haven't even gotten into the changing the fuel, getting rid of the lead, the low lead. I mean,
yeah, there's a lot of high compression, high performance aircraft that the lead issue. I don't know how that's going to work out because it's just not possible to drop in fuel that doesn't have lead in it. The aircraft engine was not designed for it. Even with higher octane, it's not going to run the same. Um, and it may affect what may end up happening. This is just speculation on my part because I deal with some of the maintenance stuff. It may be that that engine that operates with 100 low lead has a 24-hour TBO. It may be that with non-leaded fuel, because of the different function of the fuel and how the engine operates with that type of fuel, that may cut your TBO in half to 1,200 hours. I mean, we don't know. They're flying in low compression designs just fine, but I think it's the high performance, turbocharged, those types of aircraft that even Cirrus, the 550s that are out there flying, they may not fly as well, or you may end up requiring different or more frequent maintenance because of how that engine functions on that fuel. These are all things. There's a lot of question marks like this, and this is why this conversation, like I wanted to talk about it because they're valid points, and I don't think anybody's thinking about it. Everybody says we have this 2030 mandate to get rid of lead. Well, that's great, but what are the unintended consequences of doing so? Um,
And like I told you earlier, that falls right back into, you know, the the FAA isn't following what they teach us pilots, in the aeronautical decision making. We got the decide model. Okay, so we detect a problem, we estimate and react, and then we choose a course of action, identify a solution, and then we do what's necessary, and then we evaluate. We're with all this change, we're not seeing that cycle. We're making changes upon changes, and you know, if you're flying an airplane like that, guess what? You're not going to be doing it very long. So, and I think some of these regulations, I know we all want, to protect the environment and stuff, but is is really a 4-year deadline really going to make a difference? So if it is, then okay, fine. But I really think that we need to get the replacement fuels out there while we still have the leaded fuel. So we know, so we can kind of, so that the owners of aircraft, the ones that lease these aircrafts that I rent, have some data to base, their maintenance. I mean, the less the less I don't want to rent an airplane that isn't reliable because it's been using the new fuel, and it's in the mechanics, and everybody doesn't know what really is going to happen. So, I mean, those are some of the things that I see on the non-Mosaic side. I don't know about the the lightnings and the LSAs that you typically fly, Kevin, but some of those engines, I think your engine can run on MoGas, right?
it can, yep, yep, and there's
So
20 years of history with it running on MoGas, which is as long as there's no ethanol in it, it's perfectly fine. And
yeah,
and go ahead.
but our uh Cessna 172 Lycoming Continental engines, who knows? I mean, some might uh that lead in that fuel might be just what's keeping it together.
And we've had
Some
similar
of the
issues. We've had similar issues with some aircraft when, people have put fuel in some of these LSA designs with ethanol in them, where the manufacturer has said, yeah, 10% ethanol is fine. But then on the maintenance side, what we see contamination in carburetors or fuel injectors, and we see the ethanol eating through, hoses and epoxies and fiberglass that's been used in the construction. And while they tested it, they may have tested it for 2 or 3 years. They don't have a lot of good data long term, and I can tell you that what it does, if you put a ethanol in some of these LSA designs that are out there, what you end up doing is replacing a lot of parts a lot sooner. And that's why I brought it up with, if you put this new unleaded fuel in Part 23 standard aircraft, what we need is years of data to actually see what effect is going to come out of doing that. I think it's commendable that we said, hey, we want to remove lead by 2030. And to your point, like, we want to protect the environment, but we also want to get home safe. We want to get that aircraft on the ground and know that it's going to function as it was designed. Um, so it's one of those situations where there are a lot of questions, and these conversations are being had. This is why when we go to AirVenture or Sun and Fun and we sit in on these discussions, it's great. Like, everybody's talking and discussing it, but do we actually end up with real world resolutions? I mean, even magnetos in some of these aircraft, people were switching over to electronic ignition. Um, and trust me, I feel like technology can make things safer, but there's a reason that a lot of these aircraft haven't switched both magnetos over to, electronic. They usually, the STCs say you can have a manual, or like a standard magneto and one electronic magneto. And it's because there's a chance, if you lose your electrical system, what's going to happen? The electronic magneto is going to stop functioning. You don't want the engine to stop. So these are all things that need to be worked out. I think the goal of Mosaic is noble. You make it, I mean, the reality of it is this: less hours to get a pilot certificate. But real world, we both know, even though the private pilot requirement is 40 hours, I think I did 60 some hours. A lot of people do a lot longer than the minimum. And I think with light sport, we're going to see the same thing, especially if people are adding retractable landing gear, night flying, all of those other endorsements that they can get. Um, the FAA's point has been that the SLSA program over the past 20 years has been successful, and that's why they're expanding it. Um, they have the ability to claw some of this stuff back or change the rules that are put forth by the consensus standard, because we forget that the FAA, they are the ultimate ones that make the regulations for this. All the consensus standards, all we can do is give them our recommendations. They have to adopt, and in some cases they told us, like with commercial carriage of passengers, they're like, we're not going to do that. Um, and some of the aerial work, like, the manufacturer actually gets a pretty big say in whether or not the aircraft can be used for aerial work, even though the rule ASTM says yes, you can do aerial surveys or aerial photographer or photography. The manufacturer has to include that in their documentation to say that that's an approved use of their product. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize. It's not just because it's in there you can just go and willy-nilly do it. Um, so, and I mean, I don't think we've got a lot of experimental aircraft out there that are retractable gear, that have constant speed props, electric. There's hybrid aircraft out there that are flying, fly-by-wire, touchscreen, all of those things that we push forth in Mosaic. I think that's all good. Um, and we have a lot of that in the experimental side today. So we know that those products are reliable. It really comes down to what that manufacturer is willing to equip their aircraft with, and then how comfortable they feel with how far they want to let the purchasers of that aircraft. I'll give you an example. Like, there's electric aircraft out there. I'm trying to remember the name of the company right now. Um, they've got standard aircraft and they got an electrical, the Velos. I can't remember the name of the aircraft right now. I'll remember it as soon as we stop talking. But the interesting part of that is those aircraft that they have are both Part 23. They're certified to that standard. But there's no electric propulsion in Part 23. So when we were doing the standard, figuring this out, it's like we don't really care what the power plant is, whether it's electric or turbine or piston. We want to open that up. I mean, there's experimentals right now that are jet powered. Um, Sonex has one that's, I mean, sure, it can only fly for about an hour because of the amount of fuel it burns, but it is a jet. It is a personal jet, and it's something you can build in a garage, which is just amazing. Um, so I think somebody's every time we do that. I mean, you can have multi-engine. I mean, Jabiru's coming out with a two. They've got a model right now that's got two 2200 engines on there. So, and that's going to be Mosaic compliant under the new rules. So it's really, I'm going to be curious to see what the manufacturers do. I think it's going to be a lot of the same manufacturers that we know, the Vans, the Sonics, those manufacturers that have been in the game for a while. Those are going to be the ones probably allowing different configurations of their existing aircraft, which we kind of already know how they perform. But I think the manufacturers have a lot more say and to be honest, the manufacturers were a big part of the ASTM standards. Without them giving feedback and talking with the rest of the committee members, we would have had a lot of trouble figuring out how far or what to put in these standards. And I mean, even the standard that we ended up with, we got the 59 knot versus 61 knot distinction. They, in my opinion, we should have just picked one speed, one configuration, and said that's what the definition is.
I I
That,
I on the speed, I really think that the where 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 the speed I think is gonna come back to bite us all is the lower the speed, the less crosswind component I think you're gonna be able to handle. And when you've got gusts that are gusts, you're not steady. That's gonna test your stick and rudder.
yep,
So if you're a low time pilot and you want to get into something that to where you don't you're trying to save money and you get into one of these aircraft that have a really low speed, uh you're gonna be surprised. I mean, I know that the arrow's like heavy. So
yep.
when you got a 10 knot crosswind,
It's stable.
yeah.
It's more stable. Yep,
So I think there's a lot of learning that's going to have to happen with these Mosaic consensus built aircraft that, I hope that it doesn't end up in bent metal. I think it just bruised egos and I had to go around or that kind of stuff. But I know it's gonna be a surprise because I think, going from a heavy Cherokee to a light Lightning, I think I would have a challenge in my
yep,
first crosswind landing.
yep. And that's a valid point. Like the SLSAs limiting to 1,320 pounds, what they learned was that hold on a second. I have to I froze up here for a second. What they learned was with the SLSAs, they learned right quick that the low wing loading made them more sensitive in pitch and also more susceptible to oscillation. So to your point, you have a heavier, more stable aircraft. It can handle more crosswind component. Um, a Lightning, it says 15 knot, but my personal crosswind limit is 10 knots because you've got to be on your toes to get the aircraft, configured for a crosswind landing at 10, 10 knots, or when it's really gusting or blowing, you need to have your wits about you. Um, so one of the things I think they learned with the SLSAs when they came out with that light wing loading, they were actually very difficult to fly for some people. And transitioning from a heavier plane like a 172 to a Lightning or to a Vans or a Sonex, it's a different world. And it definitely, even though I had 700 hours of flight time, when I bought the Lightning, it was a requirement not only for me personally, but for the insurance company to go and get that familiarization training and get that transition training and actually feel comfortable in the aircraft.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm glad they got rid of the weight limits because I think 1,320 pounds, two seats. Um, they had good intentions, but like to your point, we had some unintended consequences and for the past 20 years, and there's only a small segment that's using the SLSAs. A lot of them are privately owned, or there's only a handful of flight schools that I know that fly them. So more weight is not necessarily detrimental in an aircraft because it gives you stability, and this is all things that we had discussed in the committee, and the FAA was like, well, we kind of had the discussion with them at one point, like if we just limit the stall speed, you're only going to be able to get so heavy, and that's kind of where it ended up, and it kind of makes sense. I'm I'm more concerned with the 250 knots being allowed. Like, convergence at that speed is very quick. Um,
Yeah.
so
So,
that's a
so
concern.
you're gonna have a experimental aircraft that look like an F-18 Hornet, with a real wing going 250 knots, just barely flying.
Yep, yep, that's my concern. I think we should have lowered the speed down to maybe, I don't know, 175 or 200 knots. I mean, maybe even a little bit slower than that. I mean, when you're in a plane doing 150 knots and you got a plane coming at you doing 150 knots, it's a blink of an eye before you see them. So it's I don't know. That's one of the things that concerned me, and I know you had concerns around the medical certification that you had brought up with the driver's license, FAA medical, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think all that is I mean, I I love to go and get my $100 hamburger, and I think flying is really something I enjoy, and there's people out there that just don't want to give it up, and they'll go to you know I I know that I'm speculating. I'm sure that, in the whole population, there's 1% that are going to be total dregs and break all the rules, but is that 1% going to break the rule that's going to hurt somebody else? That's where it gets concerning. So, yes, I think if you can get a driver's license, you should be able to fly an airplane without passengers. If you're just hurting yourself, I mean, more power. I mean, don't go hurt yourself. Just, don't um, don't don't be a hazard to other people. Is the biggest concern, and I'm all for being able to fly, with a basic med, but we 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 also need to remember that the FAA didn't have a whole lot of tools probably when they started really looking at people that were getting medical certificates, because over time they started asking those other questions. So I think in the basic med, you're relying on basically a record check on that driver's license, because you stop asking those open-ended questions about medical issues, about criminal history, and I think those are the two big ones at the end that are very open-ended questions in the FAA medical certification process.
So
And
to your point, Joe, you mentioned airworthiness of the aircraft. It's almost airworthiness of the pilot as well on the medical side of this.
yeah,
Um, because the pilot under Part 61, the pilot has to make the determination if they're the ones that make the determination if the aircraft is airworthiness before they
right.
fly it. And I think when it comes to medical things, the pilot needs to do the same thing. But you're right. You're right in the standpoint that not everyone's going to be open and honest. I mean, I had to go through the special issuance process, and it was lengthy, expensive. Um, but it was the right thing to do because then there was no question of whether or not I was legal to fly or not.
Yeah.
Um, and I did see a stat yesterday that was really interesting. It said that less than 1% of people that apply for an FAA medical certificate get denied or get held up in the process.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's good. That means the majority of people are going to be able to get a medical certificate, at least a third class.
Right. And somehow the 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 that statistic needs to get out there because I think a lot of people, you know, uh, don't want to deal with the medical headache like you did, going and getting a special issuance. And maybe some uh maybe some maybe the EAAs and the AOPAs need to shed some light on how that works because a lot of people probably need to, they probably should go get checked for whatever ailment they may have. What is it? Sleep apnea, or I think that one was a big one there for a while, wasn't it? That
It
they,
absolutely, it definitely is. And mental health is another big one. Um, I've got a lot of friends who are commercial pilots that I go and fly with, and the running joke on the commercial pilot side of things, the ATPs out there, their thing is if they have a mental health issue, they're just going to suck it up because it can end their career. And that's the thing. The FAA has gotten better about this, I think. But at the same time, these pilots, they got families to, take care of, and
yeah, that's their livelihood.
it's their
It's not a
livelihood.
it's not a hobby like for me. I mean, if I lose my certificate because of a health issue, I'm not relying on that certificate to put food on the table.
Right.
That's a big difference for those commercial pilots. I mean, I know a first class medical shouldn't be uh, a first class medical um, should disqualify people that just shouldn't be carrying other people for hire. And
Yep.
that I get that. But, do um you yeah, I was reading that article in AOPA about some female pilot that had changed her birth control method that then brought up other like depression issues or something. And she ended up having all kinds of issues getting her first class medical certificate. I'm like, wow. I mean, that just to me that just sounded like way too much. I mean, uh, where 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 do we where is that
Where's the
health,
line?
that healthy balance? And then especially like on an airline, you got two people. If there's something really mental happening, the other person in the cockpit should, you know, is there to help land the plane or help resolve the situation. Um, but I think the 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 health side of aviation probably needs a mosaic. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You would hope if somebody has a medical issue that at a minimum they would at least be aware of it and address it. And I've always looked at it, the whole I am safe acronym. Before I get in the plane or before I even work on an airplane, I think about like, hey, did I get a good night's sleep? All of that stuff. Did I eat a good breakfast? Am I having any issues? I mean, one of the things that I fight with is allergies, but you can't really take allergy medication and go fly either because that can affect you negatively. So I think ultimately for medical and for airworthiness, the pilot gets the final say most of the time, and it's not as big of an issue as I think they kind of make it out to be. But at the same time, you do want to catch those people that shouldn't be in the cockpit hauling passengers. Um, what do you think of the guy in Canada that flew for what 17 years without a certificate? Like,
Hey, he passed his training. I mean, the problem is he didn't take that check ride like we all do, you know, so he never got his ticket.
I
I
thought it
mean,
was I thought it was interesting that they can handle that one of two ways, right? They let him retire, which is crazy to me. Um, but if he flew for that many years without just issue him the certificate, he's demonstrated his ability.
yeah, but in the grand scheme of things, he cheated the system.
He did. He did. Yep. It's one of those things where it's amazing to see that. And how does that even happen? How does away with it for that long? Like that's the part that just boggled the mind.
Well, I mean, when there was no, I mean, even before the internet, you know, I'm sure once he got in the pipeline, then I think what the airline pilots they gotta do a check ride like what every 6 months or something.
Correct. Yeah, they have a check pilot that flies with them and observes them. Yep.
So as long as he's not messing up every 6 months, why would they go look? And then with the internet, I mean, I would think that would have kind of been like, oh, you know, that I would think he would worry, but I don't know if I guess Canada probably doesn't have the pilot registry that you can look up people like we can in the US. So I
Yep.
mean, um, that opened the door, I'm sure, for a few years for that person. But
Absolutely. Fascinating
and
story though.
yeah, I that's one of the things that I like about the registry, you know, that there's um, you know,
Before you
it's
get into a plane with somebody, you can see their
yeah,
ratings.
yeah. I mean,
Yep.
if somebody volunteers to be your safety pilot and you don't know them that well, you
Mm,
can at least go to the FAA and say, "Hey, is Joe really a pilot?" And yeah, there he is, you know. So
yep.
I mean that's that's a good thing to have.
Hey, you want to take a break?
Sure.
All right, let's take a break. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.
It also split the video in two. It makes it easier if we decide to edit it later.